How many of you know that if you tell a lie or spread a myth loud enough and long enough, people will actually begin to think it's truth? Anybody know that? Society and culture will actually start to adopt the lie as truth. Anybody ever experienced that? You know, we can go back in history and look at all kinds of things that have happened throughout history. One of the most extreme examples of that was going back to how Nazism spread throughout Germany prior to World War II and then right up into World War II. We can read, and I had the experience this last spring of going down to Washington, D.C., visiting some family, but I visited for the first time the Holocaust Museum. And I walked through the story of the Holocaust. Overwhelming experience, an overwhelming experience. But the story of how the Holocaust happened was very much rooted in the spread of a lie. The spread of this idea that there are a certain race of people that was just superior to anybody else. And as that race of people, the Germans began to take hold and began to believe that somehow or another they were better than anybody else. That propaganda began to spread. And over the course of a decade or so, Hitler began to come to power. And Hitler began to spread the idea that the only way to really fulfill what needed to be done for the German people was to lead to the extermination of an entire race of people, namely the Jews and the Jewish people. He was spreading a lie, and he was spreading it so forcefully and so soundly and with such vigor and such passion that his people the German people began to actually believe it. And the German people believed it so much that we actually led to the Holocaust. Of course, that's a pretty extreme example, right? That is very extreme. But there are other examples that are much less extreme. For instance, when we see on our news media more recently how mobs get formed and how mobs begin to do things that if you talk to any individual in that group of people, they would not advocate what they are doing. And they probably wouldn't do it if it was just them themselves. But when you get a group of people together and you get motivated and you get rolling, sometimes it's really hard to pull back from what the group is doing. Or let's take a much less extreme example. How about when you're a kid and you're hanging out with your friends and those friends start to say, let's go do this or that. And before you know it, you're kind of sucked into it a little bit, right? In public policy, and I learned this when I was in my master's program, in public policy, the theory is called collective action. In psychology, psychologists might call it groupthink. You know, it's really hard to do something that is different than everybody else around you. It's really hard to chart a course that isn't what everybody else is doing. The problem is that just because everybody else is thinking it, just because everybody else is doing it, doesn't make it right. It doesn't make it truth. A lie is still a lie, whether everyone believes it or not. And what we have to do as Christians is we have to begin to be able to discern what are the lies and what are the truths, especially in the culture around us. You know, we are the most marketed to society in history. The most marketed to history in society. Advertisers bombard us day in and day out with telling us the things that we need, that they think we need, or that we're going to feel more fulfilled by having this, that, and the other thing. Businesses are trying to sell us services and products around every corner. And the problem is that even we as Christians have bought into the lie because we're trying so hard to keep up with everybody else around us. One of the things that we have to remember is that God's ways of handling money are counterculture, and some of you know that we are in a series right now around stewardship. We're calling that series Life, Money, and Legacy. It's a series that was developed by Dave Ramsey. But the idea is that we want to begin to understand how God views money and how we should be thinking about money in order that we can apply His principles and see how that works out in our lives, because there's a lot of other examples out in the world of how applying the world's principles just isn't working, and I'll tell you some of those in just a few minutes. But in contrast to the way the world works, the Bible's principles do work. So even if it's countercultural, following God's plan remains the best plan. How many of you know that debt is actually a product? Debt is one of those products that we are being marketed in our society, and it's being marketed so aggressively and so thoroughly that many folks in our North American culture, you and I, can't imagine life without it. Many of us can't imagine life without debt. Many of us can't imagine doing the things that we see the rest of the world doing because we couldn't do them without debt, right? So we've begun to buy into this lie that we have to have or we have to survive by debt. It's become so pervasive that people actually will get a little bit angry at you when you suggest that there's another way to live, that there's another way to go about doing it. I don't know if you've ever tried that, but I've experienced that. The thought that you could live without debt becomes so ingrained in the way we think that it becomes something that you're willing to argue against. But you know, it wasn't always that way. Less than 100 years ago, there was something that happened in our country called the Great Depression, and where people were living on speculation and living on money that wasn't theirs. They had leveraged themselves. They had gone into such debt and gone into such financial hock with the stock market that when everything collapsed, they lost everything. They were immediately without any resources. And what it taught our grandparents and our great-grandparents, what it taught them was that we have to live within our means. We have to do some things that are practical. We have to live according to what God gives us, not according to what we want to go out and try to leverage and live with, if we don't have the resources. Or we could look a little bit more recently at something called the Great Recession. You only have to go back to 2008 when the financial markets began to collapse again. And you begin to see some of that fear that was there. And the reason it was called the Great Recession is that it was very nearly, we almost got to the level of what the Great Depression produced back in the 1940s, 1930s. But the reality is that the Great Recession, though it should have changed some people's thinking, it hasn't really done that, because we still buy into the products that were being marketed, the things that we're being told to buy. Here's some interesting stats for you to think about relative to debt. You know that 43%, let that number sink in, 43% of families in America spend more than they make in a year. 43%. These are stats from 2012. This is post-Great Recession. Since 1971, consumer debt has risen by 1,700%. 1,700%. 46% of Americans carry credit card balances from month to month. They can't pay their bills at the end of every month. They're carrying balances from month to month. 46%. Overall, we carry about $798 billion in credit card debt. So that number probably just blows your mind, right? What is $798 billion? So here's a comparison for you, and this is just fun. If you were alive in Jesus' day, if you and I were alive in Jesus' day, and you decided that you wanted to spend $1 million every day since then to today, if you spent $1 million per day from Jesus' time to today, you still would not have spent $798 billion. That's a lot of debt. The average credit card debt in a household today is $15,800, with an average interest rate of 13.1%. 13.1%. So just for reference sake, if you had let's just say you had a $10,000 balance on your credit card at 13.1%, and you only made the minimum payments on that credit card, it would take you 27 years to pay off that credit card. And you would have paid, if you followed the plan, you would have paid over $21,000 in interest on that credit card. And that's assuming that you didn't put any more on the credit card after that. 27 years to pay off a credit card. There's many more stats that I could give you. I'm not going to bore you with stats this morning. The point is that what the world is offering isn't the solution. And there's more people that are ruined by these products, the things that were being sold and were being marketed. There's more people that are being ruined that are being helped. Marriages fail at a higher rate when money is the most frequent topic of conversation. There's pain, there's bondage, and there's hopelessness involved in being debt. And that's why the Bible teaches us something very, very different. So, to help you wake up this morning, I want you to stand up with me. I'm going to do something a little different with you this morning. A little game. Come on, I need everybody to stand up. Everybody's got to participate. I want you to stand up. I want you to close your eyes. All right, everybody standing, everybody close your eyes. And I want you to now, with your eyes closed, I want you to point in the direction where you think north is. Hold your hand up, keep it there until I say, but point where you think north is. So everybody's got to start pointing. All right, everybody pointing where you think north is. All right, now open your eyes and look around you. How many of you think, based upon what you're looking at, how many of you think that everybody in this room can be right? Can everybody be right? Because I'm telling you, some of you are over here, some are over there. I've got my handy little compass here on my phone, and I'm just going to turn until I get to north. There we go. I'm pointing north. How many of you are pointing that direction? Not everybody can be right, correct? Even though we think, all right, you can have your seats. Even though we like to think that somehow my perspective matters, somehow my thoughts on the world matter, even though we like to believe that what I think is of importance, if I think that north is that way, I'll never get to Canada, right? Or if I think that north is that way, I'm still off the mark. Even if I'm off the mark by a little bit, am I not off the mark? Which means that truth is truth no matter what I think. No matter what I believe, there is one true north. It's that direction right there. So if we all can't be right, then we have to be careful in assuming that what I think about the world, what I think about the Bible, what I think about, let's just talk specifically about debt this morning, we have to be careful that what I think about all of this stuff may not be the truth. Because there is only one true north, and that is the Bible. The Bible has true north for us as Christians. That's what we are striving for. So we want to know what the Bible has to say about this subject of debt, because the world is telling us an awful lot about it. But here, the Bible is going to tell us something very different. So, if you haven't picked up on it today, we're talking about breaking the bondage, breaking the chains of debt. And in order to do that, I think we need to have a paradigm shift. Some of us may have victory on this, but I'm going to guess that not all of us have a victory on this, and we need to have a paradigm shift. How many of you know what a paradigm shift is? Paradigm shift would be, for those of you that said that north was that way, you're going to have to paradigm shift to go that it's that way, right? We've got to reorient our thinking. So here's a little exercise I put together for you to think about what a paradigm shift is. I want everybody to look at this first sentence. All right. Now, I want you to apply your own punctuation or grammar to that sentence. Apply your own punctuation and grammar to that sentence. Okay? Some of you might have come up with that as your punctuation, right? Men, I hope you didn't. But some of you might have come up with that. But I want to say, first of all, if you did come up with something like that, there's nothing wrong with it. It's a perfectly acceptable way to apply punctuation to that particular sentence. But a paradigm shift says, okay, if that's how I'm thinking about that particular sentence, what if I apply the punctuation in this way? Doesn't that change the entire sentence? That's what we call a paradigm shift. We have to work extra hard to rethink how we think about these things. The old perspective focuses on things. When we think about debt, that old perspective that I'm talking about, it focuses on things like credit scores and FICO ratings and all kinds of things that tell us that we've got to become good credit risks. And the world is teaching us that we've got to become good credit risks so that I can go out and apply for credits and I can go out and apply for loans and credit cards and different things like that. But there's a different way to live. There's a different way to do it. Lending agencies are just trying to assess whether you can pay back what they're going to give you. Have you done that in the past? Are you a good credit risk? In reality, those are just debt ratings. Instead of focusing on our income and our potential earning power, they boil everything down to debt we've carried and how well we've done at making payments. It's not the paradigm that the Bible talks about with us. You know, Americans, and this will come as an interesting thing for some of our African brothers and sisters, I think Americans have become fairly notorious for buying stuff we can't afford with money we don't have to impress people we don't really like. Amen, right? But wouldn't you agree that there's got to be a better way? There is a different way. There's a better way. The Bible emphasizes this new paradigm. In fact, actually, it's not new. It's thousands of years old, but it's still true today. The rich rule over the poor, and the borrower is slave to the lender. Proverbs 22:7. The rich rule over the poor, and the borrower is slave to the lender. When you have debt and when you have payments, you are a slave. When you have debt and payments, you are a slave. It's like wrapping yourself in chains. It's like putting handcuffs on yourself, because you are now no longer free to choose what you do. You are a slave to the person that has lent you that money. And it's hard to think about winning when you're in bondage. The Bible never says anything good about debt. The Bible never says anything good about debt. It actually uses words like slave and fool and curse. I want to emphasize that it's not a salvation issue. God still loves you, but he also warns you against becoming a slave. The reason it's not a salvation issue, and we already sang about that a little bit this morning, it's not a salvation issue because Jesus paid it all. So our relationship with him, we can do nothing more to earn that. The only way to get out of our debt that we have relative to the sin in our lives is to surrender our life to Jesus Christ and to allow him to come into our lives. And when we do that, he transforms our heart and he transforms our minds, and we enter into that relationship. We can do nothing more than accept Jesus into our lives because he paid it all. So relative to that bondage that we are in, relative to our sinfulness, we can do nothing more to earn his forgiveness. He has paid it all on the cross. So what we're talking about today in financial debt and financial burdens is not a salvation issue. Jesus loves you, and I want to remind you of that this morning. But he talks about this subject. He talks about the subject of debt and money and the issue of it we become slaves to it because he understands human nature. He understands humanity. He understands how man will manipulate their circumstances to give them power over other people. And when you're in debt and when you're making those payments and when you are beholden to somebody either for a car, for a credit card, or for many other consumer types of debts, you can do nothing until you pay that off. Otherwise, they get it back. You don't own anything when you are debt financing everything. It's not yours. And that's what we need to get straight. You know, you can wander into debt, but you can't wander out of it. You can wander in, but you can't wander out. And in order to break the chains of debt, it takes work, and it's not easy. It requires intensity. The Bible talks about what we need to do to get out of debt in Proverbs chapter 6. And it talks about that in the first few verses of Proverbs chapter 6, where it says, if you have put up surety for somebody else, in other words, if you have guaranteed the debt of a friend or somebody else that you don't know, if you've put up surety for somebody else, or if you just find yourself in debt, then the only way to get out of that is to work your tail off to get away from it. And it uses the image of a gazelle. It uses the image of a gazelle getting away from the hunter. Cheetahs in Africa are the primary hunters of gazelles. Cheetahs try to make lunch out of them. But you know what about a cheetah is true, that they fail most of the time. I want you to look at this little video. Right now, those gazelles know that that cheetah is there. Just like sometimes we know that debt is there. It takes 3 seconds for a cheetah to go from 0 to 60 miles an hour. Cheetahs are the fastest land animal. It takes 3 strides for that cheetah to hit 40 miles an hour. Right now, I would say that that gazelle is running for its life. Cheetahs, though they're the fastest land animal, can really only run for 400 to 600 yards at their top speed. Because if they ran for more than that, their brain would actually burn up and they would fall over and die. So we have to be very, very wary of what cheetahs, what debt can do for us. And when we read about in the Bible, what we read about is that we have to be running like a gazelle. Do you know that cheetahs are successful in capturing their prey only 1 in 19 times? 1 in 19 times. Why do you think that is? I think it's possibly pretty simple. Cheetahs are running for their lunch, and gazelles are running for their lives. Right? Cheetahs are trying for a meal, but gazelles are worried about their life. When you think about debt, and you read in Scripture, when you read in Proverbs that we are supposed to run from it, get out of it, work as hard as you can to get out of it, like a gazelle runs away from the hunter, that's the image that should come to your mind. It's not like a hunter with a bow and that gazelle's just kind of walking away and he's running for his life. That's the image that God uses in Scripture to teach us about what debt, how we should be working hard to get out of debt. To escape death up there, to escape debt, you've got to fight like your life depends on it. You have to work at it with what we call gazelle intensity. But you have to have a tool, and that tool is something known as the debt snowball. This debt snowball idea is that if you find yourself in debt, if you are working and you just can't find a way to get out of debt, one of the things that you need to do is you need to list all of the debts that you have. List them in a row. List them by their amount, not their interest rate. List all those amounts and then prioritize them from the smallest amount to the largest. And take the smallest amount and begin to pay that one off as fast as you can. Apply a little bit of extra, whatever you can, and pay that one off as fast as you can. And as soon as that one is paid off, take whatever you were paying, making payments on that one, and apply all of that to the next one. And then as soon as that one's paid off, just keep applying, keep applying, keep applying. It's called the debt snowball. And before you know it, you're going to develop some momentum about getting yourselves out of debt. Car loans, student loans, credit cards, personal loans, whatever it is, line those things up and begin to pay those things off. Because you've got to have a tool. You can run for your life, but if you don't have the tool, you're not necessarily going to get there. Debt, I want to assure you, debt is not a math problem. Some of us think it's a math problem. Debt is not a math problem. If you find yourselves in debt, it's most likely a behavior problem. And you have to change your behavior to change the situation. So, what do we do to get ourselves out of debt? First of all, you've got to get gazelle intense. Think about money. Think about what it's doing to your life. There's several ideas that go into breaking the bondage or breaking the chains of debt. Use the debt snowball. Second one is quit borrowing money. Some of us need to employ what we call plastic surgery. That means you need to take all the plastic that's in your wallet and in your purse, and you need to start cutting up those credit cards. You need to start cutting them up and putting them to the side because it's part of what brought you to the place of bondage and debt. Some of us aren't in the same position. And I know, my wife and I, we struggle with this at home because we like to put something on the credit card because it earns us points, and we can use those points to buy different things. And we struggle with that. But as I was reading this week, you know, there are no millionaires out there that said that they got rich by earning points on their credit cards. It leads us into habits that sometimes can spiral out of control. Some of us can manage it. Some of us can handle it. Some of us are good about paying off our bills at the end of every month. Some of us are good about that. But a lot of us, it just spirals out of control because it's easy money. It's right there. If you want to keep one card or one piece of plastic in your wallet, make sure it's a debit card. Make sure it's linked to your checking account. Make sure that you can't use it unless there's money in that checking account. Because I understand we do a lot of online things today, and you've got to have some resource, some facility to maybe do something online. But don't make it a credit card. Don't make it so easy for yourself to put yourself in a position where you can't pay that bill at the end of the month, and all of a sudden now you're paying interest on that. And you don't want to be in that position. But if you do decide to get rid of some credit cards and cut them up, just so you know, don't just rely on the fact that they're cut up. You've got to call the credit card company and actually cancel it. Because you can still do things without the actual plastic these days, right? All you need are the numbers and all you need are the pins, right? So you don't even need the plastic. Don't think that you've performed the surgery that you need to perform if you've just cut the card up. You've got to call the company. You've got to begin to change your mindset about how you use and how you think about debt. But I assure you, one of those things that you need to be reminded of, when you do that, when you get serious about this, when you get really intense about getting yourself out of debt, get ready to be tested. Because the enemy does not want you to be free. Get ready to be tested. There's going to be some financial emergency that pops up and you're going to be like, I have no way to cover this except for that credit card. There's got to be other ways. That's why in the process, and I mentioned the 7 steps to financial freedom last week, the first step is not getting out of debt. The first step is establishing an emergency fund. And I encourage all of you to put money towards an emergency fund. Save up however much you think is necessary, maybe a minimum of $500 to $1,000. That way you can weather those types of emergencies that come up. The car breaks down, the furnace stops, whatever it is. I need a new pair of glasses, I lost them, I broke them, whatever. You've got to have something in reserve that you can fall back on that doesn't involve going into the credit card or going to debt or something like that. You've got to stop borrowing money that you don't have. Save up your own money, have that emergency fund, and then begin to move forward in paying off your debts. But you've got to start by stop borrowing money. The second one is you got to start saving money. We talked last week about living on less than we make. You've got to find a way to develop a plan, to develop a budget where there is more coming in than's going out. And that may involve some significant lifestyle changes. Save money, build that emergency fund, create that buffer, create that little buffer so that you don't have to fall back on the credit cards. You will be tested in this. The third one is you might have to sell some stuff. You might have to get really serious. Those individuals who are serious about breaking the bondage of debt are going to get serious about what they really need and what they don't really need. And sometimes there's things laying around the house. You can have a garage sale, you can do whatever. There's all this stuff laying around the house. Just sell it. Nickel and dime yourself out of debt. Just start paying that stuff off. Sell some stuff. Get serious about it. Sometimes it might be your big ticket items. Sometimes it might not be. Sometimes there's just a lot of little things laying around. But I assure you that debt, to get out of debt, requires sacrifice. You've got to sacrifice to get yourself to a place of financial freedom. Some of us, because the debts are so big, they're so significant, I have no idea how to get myself out of them, you might need to find another part-time job. You might need to do something that you wouldn't normally find yourself doing. Maybe it's literally going to the pizza delivery place and finding that you're going to go deliver pizzas for them or something like that. Something menial that you wouldn't normally do. It's uncomfortable. You don't like it, but that's part of the sacrifice. Because it's so important. You're fighting for your life. You're fighting for your financial freedom that you'll do anything to get yourself to that place. And I'm telling you, it's that important to be free. To be free. It's the paradigm shift. We don't live in a culture that teaches us that we need to be free. We live in a culture that says just go out and buy whatever you want and put it on credit. And you know what? It's okay because you'll live life now. You'll live it free. You'll be happy in the moment, right? But there's this saying that you need to live now like nobody else so that later you can live like no one else. And that what that means is you need to live so sacrificially and so on a plan and on a budget and not in debt so that when you get to a place where you are financially free, you can then live like nobody else. You can give your money away and you can be in a place of security and you cannot have to worry about this stuff. The last one is, and it really is the most important one, pray. If you find yourself in financial debt, if you find yourself in a place where you are burdened by financial matters, put it to God. Prayer really works, guys. It really does. We're seeing answers to prayer around this church every week. Things are happening. The Lord's speaking to people. There are exciting things happening. But it can also happen in your life financially. God owns the cattle on 1,000 hills, it says in Psalm 50. But He also owns the hills. He knows what you need. He knows what you need before you ask Him. And some of you might be sitting, you know what, I haven't talked to God in an awful long time, and He's going to be mad. God will not be mad at you. God just misses you. God loves you. If you haven't talked to God, if you're not consistent in your prayer life, don't let that discourage you. Get back to God. Go back to, He just misses you. He wants to be in relationship with each one of us. That's the God that we serve. He's not standing up there ready to punish you. That's not the God that we serve. Are there consequences for our choices? Absolutely. Is it going to take gazelle intensity to get out of the debt that we've accumulated in our life? Absolutely. We've got to work overtime, but it's not because God's mad at us. God will listen to you and He will help you. He will guide you. He will give you the steps that are necessary to work your way out of the struggles that you find yourself in. Debt squeezes the life out of us. Living in debt, living on money that you haven't earned, living in a way that is beyond our means, it eventually squeezes the life. There's that momentary high. There's that momentary high, and I've been there. There's that momentary high when you make that initial purchase. You know, you're thinking much less about the name that you're signing to that loan document, and you're thinking much more about what you're driving away or what you're carrying out of the store or what you're doing, whatever. You're caring so much more about that momentary pleasure. But it's only in year 2, year 3, when that pleasure of that item is kind of wearing off, but you're still making that payment. And you're like, I don't even really like this thing anymore. It's not even really giving me the same satisfaction, but you're still paying for it. And you know you still got 2 more years or 3 more years to pay it off. That's when it sucks the life out of you. That's when it begins to change what you do and how you think. That's when it begins to weigh on us so that we cannot do the things that God is calling us to do. Hope deferred makes the heart sick, but when the desire comes, it is a tree of life. Proverbs 13:12. You know, a lack of hope wears us down and leaves us discouraged. But when hope is realized, we are changed and we feel alive again. There is hope in this area of debt and breaking the chains of debt and living out from under that and having a whole different paradigm. We can do that. That's what the church is called to do. We are not to be slaves to this world and slaves to the lenders, slaves to the people that are out there selling us, making us believe that everything around us is worth going into debt for. We are to live orderly lives on a plan, on a budget, making more than we spend, whatever we can. And it's not always easy, and I understand jobs are hard to come by. And this is a hard principle to live by. And there are sometimes we dig ourselves a hole. And sometimes those holes were unavoidable. But God knows that too. He knows those holes are unavoidable, and He wants to help you get out of those holes. And I assure you, He's listening. And He can ask you, cards in front of you if you have a thought, or meditate on this thought. It's a question. What people do for the kingdom of God if we didn't have any payments? Ponder that. The worship team will come back. We'll close our service in just a few minutes. It's a serious process. The Bible has a lot to say about it. Just think what we could do if we didn't have any payments.